On the morning of August 22nd, 1986, aid workers drove into the highlands of northwestern Cameroon and found something they had no language for. Entire villages, intact, no fire damage, no flood marks, no collapsed buildings, no visible injuries on any body. Just silence. 1,746 people dead. 3,500 cattle, sheep, and horses, dead in their fields. Every bird gone. No one running, no one calling for help. Just people, lying exactly where they had been when whatever this was came through. It took scientists days to understand what had killed them. It was the lake. A calm, beautiful lake miles away had exhaled. And that single breath had killed every living thing. Within 25 kilometers. This is Lake Nyos, and it can happen again. Northwestern Cameroon. A region of rolling green hills, volcanic rock, and small farming communities built on land. Their families had worked for generations. The nearest city, hours away by road. The nearest hospital, the same. In this landscape sits Lake Nyos. A volcanic crater lake. Deep blue water, ringed by green hills. Still, beautiful. A place that looked, to everyone around it, like a gift water in a dry season. Fish, a landmark. The villages near its shores had names. Nyos, Cam, Cha, Subum, farmers, cattle herders, families. A regional market drew people on weekends. These were communities that had been here for decades. Nobody in any of them knew what was in the water. 200 meters below the surface of Lake Nyos, volcanic activity seeps carbon dioxide continuously through the lake floor. In most lakes, gas of any kind would mix with the water and eventually rise to the surface, dissipate into the air and disappear. But Lake Nyos is a crater lake. Cold, deep, still, its water does not circulate the way a normal lake does. The deep layers sit undisturbed, under enormous pressure. And under that pressure, carbon dioxide dissolves directly into the water. Think of a sealed soda bottle. Shake it. Pressurize it. Do not open it. The gas disappears into the liquid. It is still there. It has not gone anywhere. It is waiting. For years, possibly decades, CO2 had been seeping into the deep water of Lake Nyos, dissolving under pressure, accumulating. The surface remained calm. The water remained blue. Nothing above the waterline gave any indication of what was building below. And there was no one watching. Because 2 years earlier, in 1984, something had happened at another lake, in Cameroon Lake Manoon. 95 kilometers from Lake Nyos. On August 15, 1984, Lake Manoon experienced a smaller version of the same event. 37 people died. Scientists arrived. They were baffled. A new investigation was opened. A new scientific term had to be invented just to describe what had happened. They called it a Limnic eruption, a lake overturn. A phenomenon so rare it had never been properly documented in recorded human history until that year. The investigation was still ongoing when the lake 95 kilometers away decided it could not wait any longer. August 21st, 1986, Thursday night. A regional market had been held nearby during the day. People had returned home to Nyos village in the evening. Families ate together. Cattle were settled in for the night. Children went to sleep. A normal Thursday night in rural Cameroon. Nobody knows the exact time it began. What is known, it began at night. And it began with the lake. Something, a tremor, a temperature shift, a small landslide on the lake wall, a disturbance in the deep stratification, disrupted the pressure equilibrium of Lake Nyos's deep water layers. What happened next took seconds. The deep water, compressed and saturated beyond its limit, began to rise. As it rose, the pressure dropped. And as the pressure dropped, the CO2 came out of solution all at once. 100,000 to 300,000 tons of carbon dioxide, the estimated range, is enormous. Because what happened was unprecedented. Erupted from the surface of Lake Nyos in a matter of minutes. A water column shot 100 meters into the air. The lake level dropped approximately 1 meter. The water turned deep red iron-rich sediment from the lake floor, dragged up into the light for the first time in perhaps decades, oxidizing in the open air. For a few minutes, Lake Nyos looked like a wound. Then the gas moved. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air. It does not rise like smoke. It does not disperse upward. It flows like an invisible river, staying low, hugging the ground, filling every valley, every depression, every low space it finds. The cloud that formed over Lake Nyos was 50 meters thick. It moved at 20 to 50 kilometers per hour, rolling down the surrounding valleys in every direction, following the land, following the same paths the roads followed, the same paths the rivers followed, the same paths the people walked every day. Toward Nyos village, toward Cam, toward Cha, toward Subum. It reached the first homes in minutes. There was no smell, no heat, not even a sound, just the sudden absence of oxygen from the air. At ground level. When a person breathes an atmosphere of pure carbon dioxide, the body responds by accelerating the breathing reflex, which pulls in more CO2. Unconsciousness follows within seconds. The people of Nyos village were asleep. They did not wake up. The cloud moved through Nyos village, then Cam, then Cha, then Subum. It traveled approximately 23 kilometers from its origin before it thinned enough to become non-lethal. Every person at low elevation within that path was dead or unconscious within the hour. The cattle fell mid-stride in the fields. The dogs, the goats, the insects, everything at ground level in the cloud's path simply stopped. Some people survived. Those who were at higher elevation on hillsides, above the cloud's 50-meter ceiling, woke up to a world that had changed entirely. In Subum village, a man named Joseph Nquain had been slightly elevated. He lost consciousness briefly when he came to hours later. He could not move his legs. He looked down at the village below him. Nothing moved. No sound. No smoke. Just the cattle lying in the fields. And the doors standing open. He was not the only one. Across the affected area, survivors who had been at elevation woke to find they could not stand. Their limbs would not respond. Many had sores on their skin, not burns, but the sores that form when a body lies, completely still on hard ground for hours, without moving, without turning, because the person was unconscious and could not. They called out. Nobody answered. Because approximately 4,000 people fled the affected area in the days that followed. But that number includes those who walked away from the edges of the cloud. Inside it, within the 23-kilometer range, the toll was absolute. 1,746 people dead. Every one of them showing the same cause of death. When pathologists later examined the bodies, CO2 asphyxiation. No wounds, no burns, no signs of external force. They had simply stopped breathing. In an atmosphere that no longer contained enough oxygen to keep them alive. The cloud had passed in minutes. By morning, the air was clear. The lake was red. The villages were intact. And the silence was complete. The first person to reach a main road was a survivor who walked several kilometers, partially paralyzed, unable to fully stand. Before finding a vehicle, the Cameroonian military was notified. Units began moving toward the Lake Nyos region in the early hours of August 22. What they found when they drove into Nyos village is still described by those who were there as something without precedent. Intact houses, cooking fires still smouldering in some hearths, food on tables, and bodies. Everywhere, laid on floors, in beds, on paths between houses. Cattle lying in rows across the fields. Not a single visible injury, not a mark. It looked, one soldier later said, as if everyone had simply stopped. The military had no training for this, no protective equipment, no understanding of what had happened or whether it could happen again. They entered anyway. By mid-morning on August 22, aid organizations and regional government officials were moving toward the area. The scale of what had occurred took hours simply to comprehend. Scientists from France, from the United States began arriving within days. They found the same thing everyone else found. No structural damage, no fire, no flood evidence. And a lake that had turned deep red. They tested the water. They tested the air above the lake. They tested soil samples. The CO2 concentrations they found in the deep water were extraordinary, far beyond anything previously recorded in a freshwater lake. And then they made the connection that should have been made 2 years earlier. Lake Manoon. 1984, 37 dead. The same country, the same mechanism, the same phenomenon they had been investigating, but had not yet fully published when this happened. Lake Manoon had been the warning. Lake Nyos was what the warning had been for. The failure at Lake Nyos was not one of negligence. In the traditional sense, no government official had been warned and ignored it. No engineer had signed off on a flawed structure. No evacuation order had been refused. The failure was the gap between science and time. Lake Manoon killed 37 people in 1984 and gave the scientific community a puzzle they had never encountered before: a Limnic eruption, a new term for a new category of disaster. The researchers who arrived at Manoon were rigorous, careful, methodical, exactly what science requires. But science takes time. Peer review takes time. Translating a scientific conclusion into a government policy takes time. Installing monitoring equipment takes time. Educating communities about a risk they have never heard of Takes time. Between Lake Manoon's eruption in August 1984 and Lake Nyos's eruption in August 1986, there were exactly 2 years. It was not enough. No CO2 sensors had been placed on Lake Nyos. No seismic monitoring was tied to the lake. No evacuation plan existed for the villages on its shores. No resident of Nyos or Kam or Cha or Subum had ever been told that the lake above their village was capable of what it did on August 21st, 1986. The lake had a name. The villages had names. The distance between them was 6 miles, and nobody had ever drawn a line connecting them on any map that mattered. The lesson, if it can be called that, is that the most dangerous disasters are the ones science has not yet had time to name. In 2001, a team of French scientists installed a permanent degassing pipe in Lake Nyos, a 200-meter tube drawn down into the deep layers, allowing the CO2-saturated water to rise slowly to the surface and vent in a controlled fountain continuously, taking the pressure down, year by year. 2 more pipes were added in 2011. By 2019, the system had reached what scientists called, essentially steady-state self-sustaining, requiring no external power, slowly making Lake Nyos safer than it has been in perhaps a century. The villages near the lake were cleared after 1986. Some original survivors did not return. Lake Manoon was fitted with its own degassing system. And then there is Lake Kivu, on the border of Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, a lake that holds CO2 and methane in its deep layers, the same signature as Lake Nyos. A lake that sits at the center of a region of approximately 2 million people. Scientists continue to debate the timeline of risk. A 2005 study found supersaturation in its deep layers. A 2020 study suggested the risk was not increasing. They do not fully agree. No complete degassing solution is in place. There are 3 lakes on Earth confirmed capable of a Limnic eruption. We have installed pipes in 2 of them. Lake Nyos is quieter now. The fountain runs day and night, venting the pressure slowly, managing what the lake spent decades building. The villages on its shores remain largely empty. The red has faded from the water. The hills are still green. And somewhere in the deep layers of Lake Kivu, where 2 million people live within reach of its shores, the CO2 and methane continue to accumulate. The lake is still. The water is clear. Scientists continue to watch. 3 lakes in the world can do this. We know about 2 of them.